Looks like Harvey might have a career in DJing. Can anyone say Holly won a Grammy? Is our national habit of eating dead animals dragging us closer and closer to a flu pandemic that could kill tens of millions of Americans? Dr. Michael Greger thinks so. He's the author of the new book, Bird Flu, A Virus of Our Own Hatching. And he recently came on this show to ring the alarm bell. He asked this question.
Up to 60 million Americans get the flu every year. What if it turned deadly? I mean, the current question wasn't exactly rhetorical. We do know that the flu is already deadly. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of Americans die from it every year from the regular seasonal flu, which according to the Centers for Disease Control has a mortality rate of about 0.2%, 0.2%. A particularly severe and infectious form of influenza struck the world back in 1918, infecting a third of the global population and killing as many as 100 million people. In the United States, that flu took the lives of more than 500,000 Americans. Unlike the average seasonal flu that we're confronting today, which has that mortality rate of 0.2%, the 1918 strand of influenza had a mortality rate of 2.5%, just a little bit higher, 2.5%. And it was the worst plague in history. But what if a strand of influenza swept across the nation that was 25 times deadlier than the 1918 strand? What if we were dealing with a flu pandemic that had a 60% mortality rate instead of a 0.2%? 60%. Well, here's the frightening news. We already are seeing one. An extremely deadly and contagious form of bird flu, H5N1, has already infected people in several countries, including densely populated China and Indonesia, as well as Thailand, Vietnam, and Egypt, among others. Just in 2012, known cases of the H5N1 bird flu in Cambodia killed 90% of those infected. In China, 65% died. In Indonesia, the mortality rate was 83%. And in Lagos and Nigeria, the mortality rate was 100%. Every single person who got it died. If the 60 million Americans who get the flu every year suddenly got this particular strand of the flu, this H5N1, then upwards of 40 million Americans would die. It would be a disaster on a scale never before seen in this nation or, other than possibly when Europeans wiped out Native Americans when they first brought the original flu from Europe. And if it spread around the rest of the world, it would make the Black Plague of the 14th century look like the common cold. Here's what Dr. Greger said about this particular flu. It's like crossing one of the deadliest known human diseases, Ebola, with one of the most contagious known diseases, influenza.
He added that the single factor that was the most likely thing to cause this flu to amplify, and in fact that was bringing it about, was factory farming. We should be doing everything we possibly can to defend against this apocalyptic pandemic. Yet every day, we as a nation continue factory farming. And every day that we do that, we're tempting fate. That's because the only thing stopping the H5N1 influenza from killing billions around the planet is the H5N1 flu itself. Only about 600 people have been infected so far by this flu simply because it hasn't yet mutated into a form that can more easily infect humans.
Right now, it's good at infecting the particular viral receptors that coat the trachea or the windpipe of birds. It needs to mutate to better attach to human receptors, but there's evidence that a strain in Indonesia and a strain in Egypt are acquiring slowly those mutations. In fact, in Indonesia last year, it was 100% mortality. Every person that got the H5N1 bird flu died.
Does this jamming birds together in factory farming slaughterhouses and pumping them up with antibiotics promotes these mutations? Now that local small family farms and local supermarket butchers have been replaced by giant transnational slaughterhouses, we've seen a rapid and radical increase in mutant strains of the flu, along with other diseases that come from factory farms, like the newly mutated and now deadly forms of E. coli and Salmonella.
We've domesticated birds for thousands of years. It's really just been in the last few years where we've seen this unprecedented emergence of these highly pathogenic strains which have killed hundreds of millions of birds. And it's thought that is when we cram tens of thousands of animals in these cramped, filthy football field-sized sheds to lie beak to beak or snout to snout atop their own waste, it's kind of a perfect storm environment for the emergence and spread of these so-called super strains of influenza.
We've known about the consequences of factory farming for a long time now. Our national diet now has more meat in it than ever before, thus accelerating heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and other illnesses that are responsible for increasing healthcare costs. Factory farms require enormous amounts of food and water, and according to a report from the World Bank's International Finance Corporation, 51% of all greenhouse gas emissions are the direct or indirect result of giant factory farms raising cattle, pigs, and poultry. In other words, factory farming is hurtling our planet toward catastrophic climate change. But so far, these reasons haven't been strong enough to really motivate us to change. Americans and policymakers haven't been ready to move away from the factory farm model to bring back local farming and reform our diet by eating fewer dead animals. But if nothing else, the fear of a worldwide pandemic that kills more than half the human race should motivate us to change how we farm and how we eat. Let's hope, because whatever joy we as a nation get out of eating chicken wings will be far outweighed by the catastrophe of watching millions of our fellow humans die. To save the human race, we need to end factory farming now. And that's the way it is tonight, Wednesday, January 16th, 2013. For more information on the stories we covered, visit our websites at tomhartmann.com, freespeech.org, and rt.com. If you missed any of tonight's show, you can now watch it in HD on Hulu at hulu.com/.